Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Jay and today I'm going to tell you an inspirational story. One that will leave you thinking long after it's over. Pam Bondi versus Schiff, the Congressional showdown that shook America. What happened in that chamber changed everything. Stay with me and let's dive into this powerful story. The air inside the Congressional chamber was thick with tension. Every seat was filled. Lawmakers, journalists, political insiders, each one waiting, some with anticipation, others with dread. Cameras were rolling, lights blazed overhead, and in the center of it all stood Pam Bondi, the newly appointed U.S. Attorney General. She wasn't here to play political games. She was here to do what no one else had dared, expose the corruption that had rotted Washington from the inside out. Across the room, Schiff sat with his usual smug confidence, leaning back in his chair, hands folded neatly on the desk before him. To him, this was just another hearing, another performance where he controlled the script, the headlines, the outcome. He had played this game for years and had always come out on top. What was one more opponent? But then there were the Biden men, Joe and Hunter, the untouchables. For years, allegations had surrounded them. Questionable deals, backroom negotiations, money quietly changing hands. Yet, nothing ever stuck. The media covered for them, Washington protected them, and anyone who got too close to the truth found their careers mysteriously derailed. But today, Bondi intended to change that. She took a slow step forward, adjusting the microphone before her. She wasn't nervous. She had prosecuted criminals before, real criminals. The kind that knew they were guilty. But Washington's corruption was different. It was polished, refined, wrapped in expensive suits, and framed by PR-crafted speeches. These weren't just men who bent the law, they were the law. Bondi cleared her throat, the chamber quieted. "Honorable Senators," she began, her voice steady, unwavering. "I'm here today not to engage in political theater, but to present evidence. Evidence that those sitting before me have knowingly ignored, suppressed, and dismissed. Evidence that exposes how power has been traded like currency in this very chamber." A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Schiff's confident smirk didn't falter, but Bondi noticed his fingers tightening around his pen. She took another breath. "The American people have been told that corruption does not exist in Washington. That questioning the powerful is nothing more than conspiracy. But today, we're going to separate truth from deception. And I promise you, by the time I'm finished, there will be no room for doubt." The battle had begun. The air inside the Congressional chamber grew heavier as Pam Bondi continued her opening statement. The room, once filled with whispered conversations and shifting glances, had gone eerily silent. Every eye was on her. Some were waiting for her to stumble, to hesitate, to reveal a crack in her confidence. But she was not here to falter. She was here to dismantle an empire of lies. Across from her, Schiff sat with carefully maintained composure, but Bondi could see the small betrayals of anxiety in his body language. His fingers drummed lightly against the desk. His gaze flickered toward his staffers, seeking reassurance. He had expected a fight, but he hadn't expected this. She turned a page in her folder with deliberate slowness. "For years," she continued, her voice like a blade slicing through the silence, "this chamber has been a stage for deception. We have been told time and time again that there is nothing to question, that certain individuals are beyond scrutiny. But today, I intend to challenge that lie." Schiff's jaw tightened. Bondi reached for the first document in her stack. A financial report linking Hunter Biden to a multi-million-dollar wire transfer from a foreign entity. The number alone sent a shockwave through the room. It was the kind of evidence that was never supposed to see the light of day. She held it up. "This," she said, "is what they didn't want you to see. Millions of dollars changing hands between foreign governments and the son of the man who would later become President of the United States. But we're supposed to believe that this is normal? That there's nothing suspicious about a company with no prior business in Ukraine handing Hunter Biden $83,000 a month?" A few gasps rippled through the chamber. Some senators exchanged uneasy glances. Schiff shifted in his seat, his fingers gripping his pen a little too tightly. Bondi didn't stop. She flipped to the next page, this time revealing an internal email, one where Hunter himself acknowledged his father's involvement. "Let's talk about what Hunter Biden himself said," she continued, her voice unwavering. "He told his business partners in an email, and I quote, 'Don't worry, my father will make sure everything is fine.' His father, the sitting vice president of the United States at the time." Now the tension was palpable. Schiff was no longer drumming his fingers. He was stone still, his lips pressed into a thin line. Bondi let the words hang in the air before delivering the next blow. "What happens," she asked, her tone shifting lower, more ominous, "when the man who is supposed to serve the American people is instead serving foreign interests? What happens when a government is no longer run by its citizens, but by those who profit from their silence?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a direct challenge. A few murmurs stirred in the gallery. Some journalists were already scribbling furiously, their cameras zooming in on the documents she had just revealed. Others, however, looked visibly uneasy. They had known. The whispers had been there for years, but no one had dared to say it out loud. Not until now. Schiff exhaled sharply, shifting forward as if readying a response. But Bondi wasn't finished. She turned her attention back to the senators. "Let me make this clear," she said. "This isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy. These are facts, documented, verified, and ignored. And I have one question for this chamber. Why?" Silence. Even Schiff, a man known for his ability to talk his way out of anything, remained frozen. The silence stretched until Bondi leaned in slightly, her eyes locked onto Schiff's. "You know why," she said almost in a whisper. "Because this isn't about justice, it's about control." Now the tension in the room was almost unbearable. Even some of the Democratic senators, those who had stood by Schiff for years, looked unsure. And then, as if on cue, a voice from the back of the chamber cut through the silence. "This hearing is out of order." Bondi turned. One of Schiff's aides had stood, his face red with urgency. "This hearing is nothing but a political stunt," he shouted. Bondi didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "If it were just a stunt," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "you wouldn't be so afraid." The aide sat down. Schiff finally spoke, his voice tight but measured. "This is nothing but a smear campaign, an attempt to discredit a sitting president." Bondi met his gaze, unblinking. "Then why," she asked, her tone lethal, "did the media refuse to cover any of this? Why was every journalist, every newspaper, every network ordered to suppress this story? If there was nothing to hide, why did they bury it?" Schiff had no answer. Bondi let the silence stretch, then straightened her notes. "This," she said, "is just the beginning." And with that, she turned to the next page in her stack, one that contained something even more damning. The chamber felt different now. The air was thick, charged with an unspoken tension. Pam Bondi could feel the shift. She had struck a nerve, and everyone in the room knew it. But this was only the beginning. Across from her, Adam Schiff sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his fingers drumming a slow, uneven rhythm against the table. He was nervous. He had spent years controlling narratives, bending the truth, and manipulating the media to his will. But today, he was not in control. Bondi reached for the next document, her movements slow and deliberate. She wanted him to feel it, the anticipation, the fear, the inevitable unraveling. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, holding up another piece of evidence. "We have heard a lot about fairness, about transparency, about justice, but what happens when those words are nothing more than a carefully crafted illusion?" She paused, scanning the room. Some of the senators shifted in their seats, exchanging wary glances. Others leaned in, captivated. Bondi's gaze locked onto Schiff's. "Let's talk about what happened when someone tried to tell the truth," she said. "Let's talk about the witnesses who were silenced." A murmur rippled through the chamber. "You see," Bondi continued, "this isn't just about what was hidden. It's about who was forced into silence." She turned to the next page. "Meet Nicholas Carter, a former intelligence officer. a man who, despite his years of service, found himself suddenly discredited and blacklisted after raising concerns about foreign financial dealings within the Biden family. She lifted a transcript of an interview. In his own words, he was warned that his career would be over if he kept digging. A decorated officer, suddenly a liability. A few gasps echoed in the chamber. Bondi didn't stop. She flipped to another page, revealing an internal memo. And then there's Melissa Hayes, a high-ranking financial analyst who discovered unusual transactions flagged by multiple banking institutions. She filed reports. She followed protocol, and yet those reports vanished. Bondi held up another document. This is an email from a superior at the Department of Treasury telling her, and I quote, "This is not something we want to pursue." The room was dead silent. Schiff's fingers had stopped drumming. Bondi turned another page. And let's not forget John Hastings, a journalist who tried to break the story 2 years ago. Within weeks, his sources retracted their statements. His career was ruined, and all of this over a story that we were told didn't matter. A few murmurs, some shifting, a cough from the back of the room. Ask yourself, Bondi said, if this was all just baseless speculation, why was there such a coordinated effort to erase it? Schiff exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is nonsense," he muttered under his breath. Bondi turned to him, her voice razor-sharp. "You say it's nonsense," she said, "but you won't deny it." Silence. "Because you can't," she added. The tension in the room was unbearable now. Schiff knew he was losing control. Then, suddenly, a staffer rushed into the room, whispering urgently into Schiff's ear. His face darkened, his lips pressed into a thin line. Something was happening. Bondi caught it. The small flicker of panic in Schiff's expression, the way his posture stiffened. "What is it, Congressman?" she asked, her tone deceptively calm. "Something you'd like to share?" Schiff ignored her, but the damage was done. The room had seen it, something had shifted, and Bondi wasn't going to let it go. "Or maybe," she continued, her voice quieter now, almost dangerous, "maybe you just got word that someone else is ready to talk." The murmurs grew louder. Schiff swallowed hard. "This hearing has gone off track," he said, his voice strained. "This is not a courtroom, Ms. Bondi. This is a political witch hunt." Bondi smiled. There it was, the defense mechanism of every guilty man. "A witch hunt," she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "Funny, that's exactly what they said about the first reporters who questioned Watergate." Schiff said nothing. "And yet," Bondi continued, her voice laced with steel, "here we are." The cameras zoomed in. Journalists scribbled furiously. The energy in the room had shifted from skepticism to realization. Something was very wrong. Bondi took a step forward, lowering her voice just slightly. "This isn't about politics," she said, her tone now almost chillingly calm. "This is about power. About what happens when powerful people think they are untouchable." She leaned in slightly. "And what happens," she added, "when someone finally dares to touch them?" Schiff's grip tightened around his pen. He refused to look at her. Bondi straightened, flipping the next page in her folder. "The American people deserve to know the truth," she said. "And whether you like it or not, Mr. Schiff, they're going to hear it." And with that, she lifted the final document, the one that would change everything. The moment hung heavy in the chamber. Pam Bondi stood tall, her presence commanding as she held up the final document. The tension was palpable, a quiet storm building in the silence. Adam Schiff's face had lost its color. He wasn't looking at her now. He was staring at the paper in her hand. Bondi took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. "This document," she said, her voice steady, "is what they never wanted you to see." The murmurs began immediately. Senators leaned forward in their seats. Some staffers whispered to each other, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. The press corps scrambled to adjust their cameras. Schiff tensed. Bondi placed the document on the table in front of her. "This," she continued, "is a direct communication between a high-level official and an individual closely connected to the Biden family. It outlines an arrangement, a deal, if you will." The room went silent. Bondi's eyes locked onto Schiff's. Mr. Schiff, she said, her voice calm but razor-sharp, you testified under oath that you had no prior knowledge of certain foreign financial transactions related to the Bidens. Is that correct? Schiff did not respond. Bondi's gaze didn't waver. You said, and I quote, she flipped through her notes, to the best of my knowledge, no improper financial dealings took place that would compromise national security or the integrity of our elections. She lifted the document for all to see. But this says otherwise. A loud gasp rippled through the chamber. Some senators stiffened, their expressions darkening. Others exchanged uneasy glances, the realization dawning. Bondi continued. This document, ladies and gentlemen, reveals a direct connection, not speculation, not hearsay, but proof that a foreign entity funneled money into an account linked to a Biden-affiliated organization. Schiff's grip tightened on his pen. His usual smugness was gone. You knew? Bondi pressed. You knew all along, and you covered for them. A few voices murmured in disbelief. The walls were closing in. Then, a sudden commotion at the back of the room. A staffer rushed in, whispering something urgently to a senior senator. He stiffened. Schiff's eyes darted toward them, his expression unreadable, but his hands gripped the desk tightly. Bondi didn't flinch. Something wrong, Congressman? She asked smoothly. Schiff forced a dry chuckle, but it came out weak. This is nothing more than a political stunt, he tried. A desperate attempt to spin a conspiracy theory when there is no evidence. Bondi slammed her hand down on the document. This is evidence. The room erupted. Some senators raised their voices. The press leaned in, trying to capture every word. The whispers turned into outright chaos. Schiff's fingers twitched. He reached for his microphone, but Bondi wasn't finished. You don't get to talk your way out of this, she said, voice like steel. You don't get to play the victim. Not when the American people are watching. Not when veterans, workers, and families are paying the price for your deception. The words hit like a hammer. Schiff's mouth opened, but no words came out. Bondi pressed forward. Mr. Schiff, she said, voice lower now, deadly calm, I have just one question for you. She let the silence stretch, making him feel it. Who are you protecting? The entire chamber froze. The question lingered, heavy and suffocating. Schiff's jaw clenched. He swallowed, then tried again. I don't. Bondi raised a hand. Don't lie to me. Not now. Not when we have this. She pointed at the document again. Schiff's face tightened. He looked toward his colleagues, but there was no one left to shield him. A long pause. Bondi turned to the room. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, this is what corruption looks like. The cameras zoomed in. The tension was unbearable. Schiff was sweating now, his carefully constructed defense crumbling around him. Then a new voice rang out. A senator, previously silent, cleared his throat. I think we need to hear more, he said firmly. Bondi nodded, and with that, everything changed. The air in the chamber was thick with tension, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. Pam Bondi stood at the center of it all, her hands resting on the stack of damning documents before her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, but she didn't falter. She had prepared for this. Across from her, Adam Schiff sat rigid, his usual confidence replaced by a thinly veiled unease. The room was eerily silent. Every senator, journalist, and staffer waiting for the next blow to fall. Bondi took a deep breath, then spoke. Mr. Schiff, earlier, you insisted under oath that you had no knowledge of any foreign financial transactions benefiting the Biden family. But the evidence in front of me, she lifted a new document for all to see, proves otherwise. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some senators shifted in their seats. Others exchanged sharp glances, already sensing that this was bigger than they had anticipated. Schiff cleared his throat. This is ridiculous, he scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction, a fabricated distraction from the real issues. Bondi didn't blink. She stepped closer to the microphone, her tone cool, methodical, lethal. This, she said, tapping the document, is a direct communication between Hunter Biden's business associates and a foreign entity. It outlines a payment, an 8-figure sum wired into an account linked to the Biden network. The room stiffened. Journalists scrambled to take notes. Schiff's fingers curled into a fist on the table. Bondi turned the knife. Not only does this document confirm illicit payments, but it also shows that certain officials, your office included, Mr. Schiff, were aware of it and chose to do nothing. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Schiff's lips pressed into a thin line. "This is baseless," he muttered. Bondi raised an eyebrow. "Baseless?" she repeated, her voice edged with fire. "Shall I read it aloud for the American people watching at home?" Before Schiff could protest, she began. "We have assurances that oversight will not be an issue. Key individuals have been briefed. The arrangement will proceed as discussed." Her eyes flicked up. That email, Mr. Schiff, was sent 2 weeks before the Biden family received the first payment. Silence. Then, a sudden movement at the back of the room. A staffer, pale-faced and frantic, whispered into a senator's ear. The senator stiffened, then quickly passed the note to another official. Bondi caught the shift. She turned back to Schiff. "It appears," she said slowly, "that people are getting nervous." Schiff's nostrils flared. "This is a political circus." "No, Mr. Schiff," Bondi cut in. "This is accountability." She lifted another document. "This one? It's a transcript of a phone call between a representative of a foreign corporation and an unnamed government official." She let the suspense build. The caller requests confirmation that the payments will not trigger an investigation. The response? She turned the page dramatically. "Proceed. We have allies in key positions." The room erupted. Some senators demanded to see the document. Others sat frozen, their faces pale. Schiff, for the first time, looked genuinely shaken. Bondi leaned forward. "Tell me, Congressman," she said, voice like a blade. "Who exactly are these allies?" Schiff said nothing. Bondi let the silence stretch. She took a slow breath, then delivered the final blow. "This," she said, lifting the evidence higher, "is corruption at the highest levels. This is what they didn't want you to see." She stepped back, letting the weight of her words settle. The entire chamber felt it. Something had just changed. The chamber was drenched in a heavy silence. The weight of Pam Bondi's revelations still pressing down on the room like a storm cloud about to break. The tension was unbearable, every eye fixed on the confrontation unfolding between Bondi and Adam Schiff. Schiff had remained silent for too long. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by an expression that bordered on panic. His fingers twitched against the desk, his lips slightly parted as if he was calculating his next move. But Bondi wasn't about to give him time to recover. She lifted another document, holding it up for all to see. "This," she declared, her voice slicing through the air like a scalpel, "is direct evidence of a coordinated effort to conceal foreign payments made to the Biden family." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some senators leaned forward, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even members of Schiff's own party were beginning to look uneasy. Bondi turned her gaze back to Schiff. "Would you care to explain this, Mr. Schiff?" Schiff's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. Bondi took a step forward. "Perhaps you'd like me to read it aloud?" Schiff finally found his voice. This is out of context," he stammered, his tone lacking the force he usually wielded so confidently. "These payments were not illegal." Bondi raised an eyebrow. "Not illegal?" she repeated, the sharpness in her voice making Schiff's face darken. "Then tell me," she continued, "why was there a deliberate attempt to hide them?" She placed a second document on the desk before her. "This is a financial trail," she stated, her voice unwavering. "A web of shell companies, obscure wire transfers, and backdoor deals, all designed to disguise the true source of these funds." She turned to the senators in the room. "This isn't politics. This is corruption." The chamber erupted in whispers. The weight of what was being unveiled was suffocating. Schiff, however, wasn't done yet. "I won't sit here," he snapped, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, "and allow this baseless attack to continue. This is nothing more than a distraction, a desperate attempt to discredit the investigations into President Trump." Bondi smirked. "Ah," she said slowly, "so that's your defense? Deflection?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. Because I have something here that even you won't be able to spin. She reached into her stack of evidence and pulled out a final document. This, she said, her tone colder than before, is a transcript. A conversation between a high-level foreign official and an individual connected to Hunter Biden's business dealings. The room stiffened. She scanned the faces before her, savoring the moment before she continued. The official states explicitly that the payments being sent were insurance, that should there ever be an investigation into certain dealings, there would be protection at the highest levels of government. The room exploded. A senator from the back of the chamber stood abruptly. Madam Attorney General, are you saying? Yes, Bondi interrupted. I am. She took a deep breath, then drove the final nail into the coffin. These payments weren't just bribes, they were leverage. Gasps echoed throughout the room. Bondi turned back to Schiff. You told the American people that this was about truth and justice, that you were leading an investigation into corruption. She let that statement hang in the air before delivering the death blow. But the only corruption you were protecting was your own. A stunned silence filled the chamber. Schiff said nothing. His face had gone ashen, his fingers gripping the desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The truth was out, and there was no stopping it now. The chamber was no longer just a battleground of words. It was a courtroom, and the verdict was about to be delivered. Pam Bondi had torn apart the carefully crafted narrative, exposing the very corruption Schiff had spent years covering up. Yet, the moment wasn't over. The final twist was still to come. Bondi took a measured breath, steadying herself as she glanced around the room. The senators, once poised with confidence, now wore expressions of doubt and unease. The journalists in the gallery were scribbling frantically, whispering among themselves, as if trying to decide whether to report on the truth or bury it like they had so many times before. And then the moment shifted. A new voice cut through the tension. Madam Attorney General. The room turned toward Senator Collins, a Democrat who had, until now, remained silent. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his tone, something that hinted at a shift in the tide. You have presented compelling evidence, Collins admitted, his fingers interlocked as he leaned forward. But I want to ask you directly. Do you believe this corruption goes even higher than what you've uncovered today? Bondi's eyes locked onto his. She let the question hang in the air for a moment before speaking. Senator, I don't believe it, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. I know it. Gasps rippled across the chamber. If you are suggesting, Schiff interjected, attempting to regain control of the moment, that the former Vice President of the United States is personally implicated in wrongdoing, I would advise caution. Bondi turned to him with an icy stare. You would advise caution? She repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. The American people have been fed lies for years, lies that you orchestrated. And now you dare to advise caution when the truth is finally seeing daylight? She stepped closer, each footstep echoing in the silent chamber. You said this was about holding people accountable, so let's hold everyone accountable. She reached for the last document on her desk. This is a sworn statement, she continued, lifting it for all to see. From a former associate of Hunter Biden. A statement that was conveniently ignored during your so-called investigation. Bondi's gaze burned into Schiff as she read aloud. I was present when discussions took place regarding payments from foreign entities. I was instructed to ensure that transactions were disguised, that they would never be directly traced back to the Bidens. And I was told that if anything went wrong, someone at the highest level would make sure the issue disappeared. A wave of shock spread through the chamber. A Republican senator stood abruptly. Madam Attorney General, are you saying? Yes, Bondi interrupted, her voice unwavering. The corruption didn't stop with Hunter Biden. It went all the way to Joe Biden himself. Schiff's face drained of color. That's enough, he said sharply, his grip tightening around the desk. Bondi smirked. Of course you'd say that, she replied. Because the more we dig, the more we find. And guess what? We're not done digging. Schiff opened his mouth to counter, but before he could, another senator stood. A Democrat. Enough games, Schiff, the senator said, his voice shaking with controlled anger. I don't know what the truth is yet, but I know we've been lied to, and that ends now. The room exploded into chaos. Senators shouted over one another, journalists scrambled to file their reports, and Schiff, the man who had once held the reins of power so tightly, now sat frozen in his chair, realizing his grip was slipping. And Pam Bondi? She simply watched, because she knew what was coming next. The chamber was no longer the same. The air was thick with the weight of what had just transpired, a collision of truth and deception that had left Washington's most powerful figures visibly shaken. Pam Bondi stood firm at the podium, watching as the dust began to settle. Schiff, once the untouchable mastermind of political manipulation, sat in stunned silence. His usual smug demeanor had been replaced with something he had rarely shown before: fear. The senators, both Republican and Democrat, exchanged uneasy glances. For years they had played the game, dancing around the truth, dodging accountability, and upholding a carefully constructed narrative. But now that narrative had collapsed. Bondi's voice broke the silence. The American people deserve more than sound bites and political theater, she declared. They deserve the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter who it exposes. She let the words hang in the air, allowing them to sink into the minds of those who had long convinced themselves that corruption was simply part of the system. Then, a shift. Senator Collins, the same Democrat who had hesitated before, slowly rose from his seat. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and then, in a voice that carried across the chamber, spoke the words no one had expected to hear. I support a formal investigation, he announced. This goes beyond politics. This is about justice. Gasps rippled through the room. Schiff's head snapped toward Collins, his face pale, his hands gripping the table. You can't be serious, Schiff hissed under his breath. Collins met his gaze, unwavering. Dead serious, he replied. One by one, more senators followed. Some out of conviction, others out of fear of being caught on the wrong side of history. And just like that, the dam broke. The press erupted with questions. Reporters pushed forward, desperate to capture the moment. Headlines were already being typed. The investigation that changes everything. Schiff knew what this meant. He had lost control. Pam Bondi took a slow, deliberate step back from the podium, allowing the chaos to unfold in front of her. She had done what she came to do: expose the truth. But she knew this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. She turned, meeting the eyes of her legal team, then glanced at the cameras broadcasting the moment to millions across the country. To the people watching at home, this wasn't just politics anymore. It was personal. For every veteran who had been abandoned, for every hard-working American who had been lied to, for every family who had suffered because corruption was allowed to fester unchecked. Pam Bondi had sent a message. Justice was coming, and Washington wasn't ready for it. The story you've just heard is more than just political drama. It's a wake-up call. It challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truths about power, corruption, and the people who control the narrative in Washington. But now, the question is, what do you think? Do you believe that justice will prevail, or will this just be another case of powerful figures escaping accountability? Do you think investigations like this truly change the course of history, or are they just another political spectacle? This isn't just a story about Pam Bondi, Adam Schiff, or the Bidens. It's about America. It's about the system that governs us, the media that informs us, and the choices we make as voters. Should leaders be held to the same standards they impose on others? Should corruption, regardless of party, be exposed and punished? I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this explosive moment? Were you surprised by the revelations? Do you think more people are waking up to the reality of how Washington operates? Or do you believe nothing will change? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. Your voice matters. Whether you agree, disagree, or have a completely different take, Let's keep the conversation going. If you believe stories like this need to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because in the end, truth only wins when people refuse to stay silent. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and leave comments for the story.